Hello everyone, my name is Colleen Darnell and you have probably seen me and my husband John and our two Basenji dogs, Narmer and Kemi, walking down the streets of Durham, Connecticut. I wanted to film this brief video for the Coginchaug Valley Education Foundation about not so much being an Egyptologist, but a collector of historic and vintage fashion. One of the things I absolutely love about old clothes is how much we can learn about history through what people wore. If you think about it, every time you open a history book and you read about something that someone is doing, from signing the Declaration of Independence through to the civil rights marches of the 1960s, you can look at pictures of what people are wearing and understand a little bit more of history. Every time you walk into a museum, a painting is going to show you what was in vogue in a particular era. So I want to take you through a little bit of a tour of some of my favorite historic pieces. So what you see here is one of the earlier pieces in my collection. It is a silk dress from about 1870. Now, we often call this type of fashion Victorian because of Queen Victoria in England. And what makes this dress so poofy in the bottom is the underskirts. There's actually a little bit of a metal cage that I'm wearing underneath the skirt that provides the shape or the silhouette. And really, that defining silhouette is one of the things to look for when you're trying to figure out what decade a particular dress might be from. Here we've moved forward in time about 40 years to roughly 1910, and I'm wearing a woman's wool walking suit. And one of the things I absolutely love about this fashion is how you see the influences from what men would have been wearing. And this is called a walking suit precisely because it was intended for wearing outside on a hike. Now we're in the decade known often as the Roaring '20s, the decade 100 years ago that is defined by events like Prohibition and the passage of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote. This is from an awesome photo shoot that I did with local Connecticut photographer Jen Schulten. And I'm wearing a dress from the 1920s that has rather of an unusual silhouette. Like that 1870s dress, this, which is known as a robe de style, has panniers, has these metal elements that make the sides of the dress stick out. And this is supposed to make the dress resemble in style much more elaborate dresses from the late 1700s. I'm also wearing a cloche hat, coming from the word for belle, and this was a hat very commonly worn in the 1920s and fits with my hairstyle, which is a bob that also became popular in that decade. The more typical dress style of the 1920s had a very straight silhouette. And one of the reasons why they chose that is they wanted the dresses to make women look as young as possible. And a lot of flapper fashion was all about the celebration of youth. So I give you a few examples here of a pink chiffon dress as well as a green chiffon dress that has heavy beading. And one of the things that they really liked to do in the 1920s was to add heavy beads to dresses because one of the dance crazes of the time was the Charleston. And so as you moved, the dress itself sort of emphasized these dance movements. And finally, a dress with red embroidery that shows how the 1920s drew inspiration from all around the world. And these dresses are often called Hungarian peasant dresses because the embroidery traditions come from that area of Europe. Next, I show you an evening dress from the 1930s. And I thought it would be great to end with a look that is not typical from day wear, but rather what you would wear going out at night. And the 1930s are particularly defined by what is called a bias cut, meaning that the fabric was cut on a diagonal on the bias, and this enabled the dress to fit the body closely without having stretch fabrics. So it's remarkable to look at the difference between various types of fabric and how they could be cut and sewn and styled to produce the desired silhouettes of the age. And finally, I show you an image of both me and John wearing 1920s dress with our Basenji dogs, Narmer and Kemi. If you want to learn more about what we do as Egyptologists, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel, Vintage Egyptologist, where we mostly talk about ancient Egypt and read hieroglyphic texts. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vintage Egyptologist, and even follow a separate account that we have at How to Read Hieroglyphs to learn more about the fascinating writing system of ancient Egypt. I hope you've enjoyed this quick overview of decades of vintage fashion.